Welcome to the Gilmore Car Museum.
Remember that miniature town you built with your toys as a kid? All the random buildings you pushed together just so you could roll your favorite cars and trucks around them? You know, boat-tail speedsters and antique school buses, race cars pulled up beside vintage tow trucks, a jet car parked beside your favorite Mustang, a Stutz Bearcat out in front of a vintage diner. You filled that little old barn with Model Ts and that 40s-era car dealership with Cadillacs. You loved them all, and they all lived together in that little town of your dreams. Well, that place has actually come to life on a one-to-one scale. So, spend one perfect day with us at the Gilmore Car Museum in Greater Hickory Corners, Michigan. The Classic Car Club of America just finished its own Field of Dreams at the Gilmore, except the field is a 125-year-old barn, but it's filled with all the stuff those dreams are made of. The museum is dedicated to full classics, those absolutely giant luxury sedans, coupes, roadsters, and limos built between, say, 1915 and 1948. And we're here to spend one perfect day with the cars and the people who make it such a special place. We're here at the Classic Car Club of America Museum with Don Desmett, the executive director. And this is a brand new facility now, right?
It is. Well, the first part that we'll be walking through was built in 1987. And we're here now talking about a brand new addition and a new way of looking at our collection.
In this big old red barn. It's beautiful. So Don, this is an old barn essentially, right? That's been now repurposed as this museum.
That's right. Actually, it wasn't even on this property. They started collecting barns at the Gilmore. So this was in another part of Michigan. Wow. And they moved it board by board and put it here, and the Classic Car Club of America Museum started with a 125-year-old barn.
That's incredible. And now with this expansion, you've just taken this idea of this 125-year-old barn and added to it, expanded the footprint of the museum, and now you've got these amazing collection all under one big giant roof, right?
Yeah, I have to say that before I came, when I used to visit here a lot, it always felt like there were cars in a barn. And now with the addition, we have this beautiful space. We have a way of showing the collection in a brand new way, and be able to use the space. And so far, people are really, really loving it.
Well, you teed me up perfectly. Why don't you walk us through this?
We thought about how we were going to talk about the history. The thing that museums do well, and I'm from the visual art world, is they tell stories. They tell stories of the moment or of the culture in which we're in. And I don't think we're doing that. So this committee really got together to think through what we needed to do to show the history and bring people forward in that history.
The Classic Car Club of America started in 1952. We're about just over 3,000 members worldwide. My name is Carol Jensen, and I am the past president of the Classic Car Club of America, and I am the current vice president of the Classic Car Club Museum. We focus our attention on cars that were built between 1915 and 1948. That's the period of time where you really saw exceptional technology and engineering, custom coach building, one-off cars, one-off body designs. It's really a unique period of the classic era. And one of the things that we're trying to show people is that the classic cars of this period of time, they're not Model T or Model A technology. And I love Model Ts and Model As. I have a Model A pickup truck. But there is such significant advances in the teens, the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. This is a lot of cars that we have to entrust to the next generation. You know, with the Classic Car Club of America, which is so much a part of our lives, we come for the cars, but we stay for the people.
So this is, when you walk in, is a replica of a salon. And the salons were sort of the first car shows. We now have annual car shows all over the world. The salons were picked An example would be the Waldorf Astoria in New York.
The hotel.
Yeah, and they would bring the newest models, the newest custom cars in and show the wealthy, but not only the wealthy, but the chauffeurs in many cases who were going to drive the cars for them.
Were they helping to make decisions about which cars were going to be bought?
Absolutely were.
So Don, one of the things I noticed here was that this amazing juxtaposition between these barn rafters and then these beautiful columns and things like this chandelier here. So walk us through how this actually works as far as a salon being represented in this great barn space.
So what we wanted to do in this first section is relate to those salons, those car shows, and we brought in the real things, beautiful chandeliers. We wrapped the columns so that they'd be more ornate, and we are also then showing some photographs of the time period to kind of help the viewer make the connection.
Was that like a hotel lobby?
It's a hotel lobby. Every year they would bring in sort of the cars of the moment and they would try to sell. So I want to point out a couple of the cars in this first section. This 1924 Packard, this person bought this car as a total wreck in a farm, sitting out with weeds, and he spent 30 years putting this car together.
30 years.
30 years. I mean, it was truly a labor of love.
What else do you have in here?
Also, this Cadillac, actually, Margaret Dunning's very important to the car club, and she has a great history. She bought this car and bought a Packard that's upstairs, worked on them herself, drove the car upstairs, actually, on the Indy Speedway, and lapped at 79 miles an hour when she was 104. Yeah, I mean, I wish I would have been able to meet her. But she also had this beautiful Cadillac, which is a really nice, so this car would actually be a second car that families, and these, we're talking about wealthy families, would not have this car for their daily, but they would have this car to do sort of touring a little bit. Or in this case, this has a compartment to hold golf clubs. So they took it to the country club, and so it was that kind of car.
But pleasure cruising. Or
Yeah.
Going after that.
Yes, absolutely. But you know, it's in immaculate condition, and it's one of my favorite too. I'm going to say that every one of these is one of my favorite in the museum. I know.
You have to.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I can't pick a favorite, but this is truly an amazing car.
So Don, we walk into this expansion of this 125-year-old barn, right? And the first thing we see is this art in motion display as you walk in. Now, I'm sure none of this was an accident. So what's going on with this, and what does all this mean?
So again, I talk about how we need to tell the story of this era in a better way for more people to understand it. This is something that captures everyone's attention, from 5-year-olds to 90-year-olds. They love using this. It's interactive enough so young people who like to do that can get this thing started.
You stand there?
You literally stand where it says stand here, and this will start sort of a theatrical approach to talking about how cars are designed. We picked these two cars because they're really modern designs.
People have to remember, this was the 1930s, right? So this was like these hideaway headlights on the Accord, or just the paint scheme of this Delahaye. Was this sort of just groundbreaking ideas and design put into motion?
It really changed, and again, I come from the art world, so they were taking cues from the art world as well as from engineering. So we were getting advanced ways of engine building and suspensions and things like that, but they were also looking at the visual arts, Art Deco, as well as other movements that were happening in the 1930s, and cueing from that. And I think if you would go to an art museum and look at the collection from this period, you would see real examples of how these things crossed over.
So Don, now you've divided the building up into different sort of ideas or themes?
Yeah, we have, again, telling that story is so important. And so we have divided this into two sections. On the left side, as we're walking down, are the automakers. These are the cars that came off of the line, although they had some specialty to them, like the new engine of the year. So it made them special enough to become a classic. So,
but not custom bodywork.
Not necessarily custom bodywork, okay. But taking cues from the coach builders of a few years before, they would take those ideas and then put them into their cars.
So something like this Packard.
Yeah, this 37 Packard, which again, I'm gonna say is my favorite car in the collection. This is just a beautiful example, and it's perfectly restored. The interior of this thing could be in a living room. And that idea came from the coach builders, but then in 37, Packard put it into a production car.
And then this thing over here, now, you just talked about a perfectly restored car, and now this thing looks like it might be unrestored. Is that true?
That is very true. And again, to be able to tell the full story, I think it's really important to see cars that have not changed since 1929 when this car was new and see what happened to this thing in its real life. But it's still a beautifully designed car. It is a classic, but we make decisions on leaving things as they are so people can see that these things were real, they were really used, and treated sometimes poorly, and sometimes just being that old is gonna make you look like this.
So as we walk down through this area of these factory cars, the shapes and styles seem to either get longer or they start to get rounder. Is that just because of the era they were built in, or were these designers influencing each other?
Well, they were definitely influencing each other, and also these engines kept getting bigger, and that changed how the front ends had to be. So these two cars, this Lincoln and this Duesenberg, are top-notch cars in the collection. It's a beautiful example of the manufacturers coming off the line and no need for a coach builder in this case because they had every detail down. So these cars, many of these cars weighed over 5,000 pounds. So it took them a little bit of energy to get going. Also, it took a little bit of energy to get them stopped again.
I love the stopping part.
Yeah, I do too. And when I first started driving these things, it was like, whoa, I got it going. It's going 60 miles an hour. Like,
There's
now,
a stop sign up ahead.
Yeah, when do I hit that? And but also this era really figured that out. I mean, they innovated different kinds of brakes. The Cord actually was a front-wheel drive car, the first.
And supercharged, right?
And supercharged, yeah. So there were a lot of innovations that the muscle cars of the 70s would have never had without the innovations that happened during this time.
So now on the other side of this expansion is the custom coach works, right?
Right. So the manufacturers actually came up with many of the engineering innovations, and the coach builders, who actually came from horse carriage.
Right.
This side talks about many times one of a kind, or many times where the manufacturers have let these designers really change and make these things really special.
Like, and for instance, this one, that looks like it's clad in leather, is that right?
It is, this 1928 Stutz. So Stutz really started as a race car. They built, one of their first cars was in the Indianapolis 500. So they really were thinking about them in terms of racing and speed. But what this car did is they also felt that they had to get these cars to the general public, or to a public that could afford them, but they still wanted to keep this idea of speed, which was their trademark. So this is body designed by Wayman. Wayman was actually an airplane designer during the war, World War I, and in order to lighten the airplanes, he wrapped them in fabric and in leather. So instead of adding weight to this Stutz that would have slowed it down, the body of this car is actually wrapped in leather. So again, I keep talking about cars that are my favorites, but this 1938 Buick, this was purchased by the Singer family, the Singers who designed sewing machines.
Sewing machines.
Yeah. So they bought a Buick and they sent it, in this case, to London. And Lansfield Design was doing things in England, and they gave this Buick to them, and then Lansfield made this a one-of-a-kind car. And I love this car because it's so subtle. Some of the other cars are not subtle, and not subtle in good ways, but this car is so beautifully subtle, the black on black.
It really is.
Just enough chrome to show its lines. I think it's, again, another perfect example of a custom-built car.
And this isn't a Stutz or a Cord or an Auburn or a Duesenberg or some other seemingly exotic model. This is a Buick.
You know, when I first arrived here, I was a Buick snob. I'm like, why is a Buick in the collection? They're good cars, but I didn't think of them as classics, but really there are 3 in this collection that are just really amazing examples. But this is just truly an amazingly beautiful car, and I hope I get to drive it someday soon.
Make me number 2 on that one.
All right.
And then we end on a Lincoln down here, right?
Yeah, so this car I think is really important. It's not my favorite. This is a 1948 Lincoln Continental, and after World War II, the whole idea of automotive design changed. America won the war, we became a superpower, the economy bounced back, the interstate road system started, and so the idea of who was driving these cars and why they were driving them changed completely over a really short period of time. So this car is a fine example of how things changed, because now people were driving their own cars. They didn't have chauffeurs. They needed a car that was very, very comfortable. They needed a car that would fit the whole family, and they needed a car that could take things with them on their vacations.
Like a big trunk.
So look at the size of this trunk. So that's why this car really is important, without being my favorite. But it went on the interstate road systems. People traveled across the United States. They took vacations. There was a new wealth that was more spread than during the earlier times, and people could afford to do this. So this Lincoln was certainly made for that. But this became then the end of the classic era. I'm very proud of what we've done here, but it truly took members of the car club, the board of the museum, all of us really working together to get this thing in shape and the way we wanted to tell that story. And it really truly took, a lot of people to be able to pull this thing off. And I thank them, and I love being here, and I'm hoping that everyone comes and visits.
And we cannot thank you enough for having us. This is an amazing exhibit, true, but just the space that we're inside, right? It's really unique, and it's an amazing way to see all these old classic cars as well. So we really appreciate you having us out here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Don.